Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another episode of Overbooked here on the channel. This is the series where I talk about every single book on my shelves because it's about time. Today we're going to be talking about Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings series. Some quick disclaimers before we start. I think I was gifted these copies of the original series for Christmas one year. I own a couple of other ones that I've bought from charity shops. None of them have been review copies, regardless of where books come from. Nobody's paying me to talk about books except my patrons, and all opinions are my own. I'm going to keep this as spoiler-free as humanly possible while still talking about the multiple series as a whole. I'm going to leave out some of the major spoilers that sometimes people do leave into these videos. Don't worry. But if you do want to go in knowing absolutely nothing, it's a big commitment, but go away, read all of the books in Realm of the Elderlings, and then come back and we'll talk then. And I will link the story graph for the series down below in case you want to check out any user-generated content warnings. I think this is going to just come up against the fact that there's a gap in my shelves here because I can't work out how to make these sit nicely together without damaging everything. Maybe that was the solution. So this series was, I believe, technically published between 1995 and 2017? Which feels like a very long period of time. The 2017 books are much later. The bulk of them were 90s and 2000s reads. They are very well known. They tend to be one of those series where they'll crop up on a lot of must-read fantasy lists. It's very funny, often Robin Hobb slinks through onto the fantasy lists of people who only read men because they don't realise she's a woman. Robin Hobb is a woman. She's a very prolific writer, and this is kind of her big series that is actually lots of little series across a long time span in one universe, one realm, the realm of the Elderlings. It kind of perfectly hits that high fantasy, multi-series, let's get forums and fandom engaged period of time where the internet wasn't quite a terrible hellscape and it was fun to have a lot of different people trying to put different plot threads together across multiple books. I feel like that still does exist now. Look at something like Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere, but I have lost all faith in the internet and its ability to have discussion in a nice way. So I don't feel that way anymore. And part of me is kind of sad that I missed out on what I would call the golden age of Robin Hobb fan forums, which I know friends of mine were in. Sad. I'm sure those things still exist. I don't feel like they are as popular as they were. Maybe that's just me. So we're in a vast lore-filled world. We follow a bunch of different characters across different series. Primarily, we follow a character called Fitz, and that's the thing I'm going to talk about probably most, where I'm kind of setting the scene. Fitz shows up in the Farseer trilogy, which is this first series, which is the one people often start with. We'll come on to reading order in a little bit. Probably, if I remember. I don't think that's in my notes, but I probably should talk about reading order. Fitz is the illegitimate son of a prince who is brought to the castle in order to be raised as a royal assassin. That's what's going on in these early books, and we follow Fitz through multiple different series, through multiple different times in his life, through multiple different conflicts. There are also other series that don't feature Fitz prominently that are still in the same world and do still tie together into a major plot. So Fitz is in Farseer trilogy, the Tawny Man series, and the Fitz and the Fool series. Then you have the Live Ships trilogy, which is my favourite, which is kind of a nautical fantasy. And then the Rainwilds quartet, which is in theory young adult. I don't think it matters hugely if you treat it that way, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend that a young adult go and just read that series and then never read any of the other books, but it might be a great gateway for that reason. I'll say for the sake of this video, I've not read The Soldier and Son. It's not something that's crossed my path, so I'm not going to be talking about that here. I've just read all of those other books. I read pretty much all of these via audio back in 2020, so during the lockdown, and I really enjoyed it. It was a great experience. 10 out of 10 would recommend if you got locked down again. Hopefully not. One of the main reasons I would recommend reading these books is if you like what I would call classic epic fantasy. There is something nostalgic about it. There's something so rich and detailed about it, something that's steeped in lore. There is decades worth of books to read and to absorb, and they have that very specific tone that comes from fantasy at that time, where things still feel fresh, where things don't feel overdone, though I'm sure some people felt they were at the time. I've not read oodles of classic fantasy from this time period, but I just love the sensation these books give me, that classic fantasy world, castles and princes and betrayal and just all of that fun stuff. I just love to be handed lore and good things and puzzles that don't get solved until many books later, and it just brings me joy. Just brings me joy. The characters of this series, Fitz is a controversial protagonist, shall we say. I think a lot of people are told, possibly correctly, that they should start with the Farseer trilogy, where you meet Fitz as a young man. And Fitz is a character who at any stage of life, makes some interesting decisions. I personally am of the opinion that it usually makes sense why Fitz is making a nonsensical decision and why he acts foolishly, but he is irritating, and I think I'm going to give Robin Hobb the benefit of the doubt that he is being intentionally irritating, like that's a character flaw of his. A lot of his impulsivity and a lot of his attitudes towards women in some portions of the book. Fitz is the protagonist of the story in a lot of ways, but he does an awful lot of growing across the series, and that growth is not linear, and I think that's so interesting and a cool thing to explore, but at the same time is also deeply irritating while you're reading it. And a lot of people fall afoul of particularly these first books because they don't get on with Fitz, and then they don't want to read the rest of the book because they think, oh, Fitz is also irritating in those. Not false, but a complicated thing that we have to just process, and I think a lot of people who have read them all would have different opinions. Everybody would have a different feeling by the end. And it probably also depends on when you're doing the reread. I think my feelings on Fitz might have changed going back and rereading the first series again. But the characters as a whole, there are so many of them, and they're all just so rich and interesting and honestly make me cry. Even the characters I don't like made me cry. I was shocked when I got to the end of the last book. I wept. I wept for many minutes. And frankly, had I not pulled myself together, I think I would have wept for longer. Just the emotional depth that these characters go to in this series, and I feel like I'm going to run out of words every time I try and talk about this, because it's so much of it is very personal and like a gut feeling more than it is a specific, like, I like the sentence structure here. It's so much of it is about how I felt reading these books. And the characters were great. There we go. That's how I felt. I felt reading these books that the characters were great. There are some elements that I don't want to spoil because they could potentially be spoilers, particularly about how the world develops and things that join the world across the books. If you were to look at the covers of the books, you would probably work out what I'm talking about. And if you have read them, you will absolutely know what things I mean, but they are some of my favourite things, and I have talked about them many times on the channel that I really enjoy them, and they are another great example of that particular fantasy trope. I enjoyed it. It was great. It felt to me, because I came to these quite late in the game for me personally. I know a lot of people read them as teenagers or very young adults, and I read them as a proper, I was fully an adult by that point, and I read a lot of fantasy and science fiction. I felt like these books were giving me the stuff that I had wanted from other things. For example, reading like The Inheritance Cycle, I loved those books as a teenager. As an adult, I went, okay, these might be a little bit derivative. And then you read these and you go, oh, here's that meat and that exploration of empire and that interesting stuff that's going on set in this similar fantasy world. It's a wonderful time. So good. Positives, the audiobook is great. Just really loved the audiobook narrator. There are multiple narrators across the different series. The one thing I will say that I remember feeling at the time, and it's just come back to me now, is that sometimes the audiobook narrators pronounce names and place names differently, and that's just a personal pet peeve. But who's to say who's correct? And it's just about maybe dialect, perhaps. If you have started these or you're planning on it and you're worried about that thing about Fitz not being the most enjoyable character, do you need to read Farseer and the other Fitz books first? I haven't really touched on reading order because people have covered it quite a lot in different places. I think that it probably does make a difference if you're wanting to read them and experience the slow release of information about the world as a whole that Robin Hobb clearly intended as these were being released, and those discussions and getting to understand who is who. I think that matters. If you're wanting to just get into them, I would say you could read Life Ships. I think it's different characters, it's differently difficult, but it is very good, and you probably could get away with it. I wouldn't jump straight to Rainwilds at all. I would leave Rainwilds until later on, but I think you could manage that. But all told, I think probably the answer is to try and get on board with Fitz and read them in order. That was my experience of it, and I find it so hard to imagine doing it any other way. But I remember getting to Live Ships and saying, oh, this is even better, and just going to an even bigger place and doing more exciting things. And it's nautical, which is my favourite. I would say if you are like me in terms of your ability to absorb names and detail and those kind of lore drops, I would suggest either planning to do multiple reads. It's one of the things I wish I had the time to do, and I might try and plan in a Realm of the Elderlings read-along for next year, perhaps. Either planning multiple reads, being very, very careful and attentive, or having the wiki, which is thankfully hugely detailed, or a friend to guide you. I had a friend who was able to say things to me like, hey, do you think that character might do this? And I was like, wait, What? That has blown my mind, and I hadn't picked up on it at all. So it depends on how well you pick up on those kind of things, but you will miss things if you perhaps don't have a friend or the ability to really take in those details. I will lastly say it is well worth checking out the content warnings for these. I would very much specify animal death. That was one of the things that I found particularly with Farseer, just absolutely brutal. Deeply emotional about all the dogs that Robin Hobb has ever written. There are also some very difficult things, particularly in live ships. Those are very well documented if you want to look them up. I would say definitely check out those content warnings, especially if you are planning on reading live ships. It is well worth doing. And if you're doing it by audio, I think it is. For me personally, it was much worse because I couldn't skim over a section. It was difficult. Other things you might want to read that are similar to this, name any epic fantasy series, honestly, it would apply. I'm trying to think what I've read recently that gave me similar feelings. I think Daverbad, potentially, just up here behind me, has similar emotional resonance for me, though they are slightly more modern. Tigana is another one that I very much enjoyed that's also a little bit more vintage. Possibly something like Priory of the Orange Tree for that detailed world building. And I've mentioned the Cosmere. I don't rec Brandon Sanderson on this channel much, but if you love that series sprawling kind of idea, obviously the Cosmere is one of the biggest examples of that. This has been a whistle-stop tour of Realm of the Elderlings, just to give you my very basic feelings. As I say, if we do a read-along next year, I will have much more detailed things to say, and to be honest, you could probably go back and watch my vlogs from that period of time to get what my feelings were on each individual book at the time, but that might be a bit of a quest. But if you're looking for more content, I'll point you over that way. I would have absolutely loved to have got a reread in ready for making this video, but there was no universe where that was at all possible for me, so you'll have to bear with me with my memories of what I read. Thankfully, it took up such a huge chunk of my life during a time where there wasn't much else happening that I can remember it quite well. If you've read these, let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. If you've got any advice for people who are maybe planning on reading them for the first time, let's just have a bit of a shared conversation down in the comments. While you're commenting, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. You can also come hang out on Discord where we have chill chats about books. I'd like to say an enormous thank you to all the ghosts who haunt me over on Patreon. They support the channel and in return get early access to videos, bonus content, live streams, and more. If you'd like to join their number, that's linked below as well. Thank you so much to you for watching. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. It's gonna be some bloopers now. Put some intro music in, please. Put some intro music in.